our there we go. Our goals and how are we going to be able to make that happen functionally. Um, and so because those, kind of site appurtenances are, they're not necessary usually. These are elective processes that people are going with to have a pool, to have a spa. And so being as that is, it's kind of low-hanging fruit to be able to target and say, hey, we'd like to, focus on this part of energy use and make a determination there about how we might want to regulate that or how that's going to fit our community goals. We also have outdoor spaces. So that's going to be outdoor heating areas. That's going to be areas with large openings that maybe get into spaces where we have connections to our mechanical equipment. And how are we going to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those spaces as they relate to not quite in the thermal envelope or adjacent to the thermal envelope and having a direct effect based on how people use that particular space. So that's another component of this. And then snowmelt systems, which is obviously super pertinent for Colorado, especially in the high country. There's a lot of focus on this. Snowmelt systems for large multifamily residential projects, things like that, do have a large energy demand. And then in the 24, we see a little bit of clarification that comes in about roof systems and things like that. So that's in broad spectrum today, kind of what we're going to be covering are these kind of four sections of outdoor energy use that are kind of the key ones that a lot of communities have been highlighting or focusing on as they've been crafting their regulations or figuring out kind of what they want to do with that 21 and 24 jump. So we're going to start by always making sure that we're following the scoping language of the energy code and making sure that because we'll be talking about multifamily, this is really pertinent. We have a certain definition for residential building in the energy code that doesn't follow the specific guidelines of like the IBC, right? So I can build an R2 that's 3 stories tall. And while I wouldn't be building that out of the IRC, I would still be using the residential application of the IECC for the requirements associated with that for that 3 story or less. So I want to, let me turn on my little laser pointer here, but we're talking about those 3 stories or less above grade plane here. And that includes our R2s, R3s, and R4s. Meanwhile, we can talk about commercial buildings, and that's functionally anything that doesn't fit our catch-all definition. That is what we're going to use to say, okay, if it doesn't fit residential, that's our catch-all definition. Fit everything in there. Call that anything that fits that bill a commercial building now. So we can have that same R2, but 4 stories tall, like we have on the left here, where we have a garage story and then 3 stories of residential building above. And that is going to help trigger those requirements for that commercial building application. I think that's especially pertinent when we look at that exterior energy use, because oftentimes that really falls in that multifamily category for some of these appurtenances, like pools and spas and things like that, and the kind of typical places that we'd associate that with. And usually speaking, right, we see those permitted with some sort of clubhouse structure, some sort of B or A3 occupancy that's kind of tying all of this together. So just making sure that even though the developer is talking about, and I've had this conversation come up for some folks where they're like, well, this is a residential pool. It's, focused on providing an amenity for the residents that live there. And it's like, that's great, but really what we're talking about is commercial application here. So especially when it comes to these parts of where you're going to parse this out, making sure that you're really clear on that expectation really does matter. Remember, this can also follow issues of mixed use, right? So we'd apply mixed use for residential, separate from our commercial building settings, and making sure that we're parsing those out where possible. We won't get into like full compliance path details on that or kind of that deeper sort of conversation on it, but it's just to remind everybody that this is one of the components that's out there as well, is that you can mix and match these based on fitting the parameters for being residential and touching a commercial building or touching commercial space or being with that same envelope. So that can be that stacked podium style building. That can be a number of different construction methods that are going to fit this bill. So just to remind everybody about that. So with that, we'll crack into outdoor lighting. So outdoor lighting has really some major components that we're going to see in this section of the code, which is total power allowance, our lighting controls, and natural gas lighting. Now, I bring up natural gas lighting not because it's a major component for a lot of folks, but it has been one that I've seen focused on when it comes to local regulations quite a bit lately. So as people have been looking at that 24 and seeing some of the places where they might want to make some adjustments, be a little bit more stringent, things like that, I've seen natural gas lighting as one of those targeted components. And that's why it kind of fits in that conversation of that overarching EEOP or REMP or those sorts of conversations where you're making that community lift about what you're going to do for regulations on that exterior energy use. And if you're going to allow or if you're going to be more stringent on some of those gas components with it. So the first thing that we're going to point out here is that the exterior lighting power conversation has been in the code for quite some time, as far back as the 18. And so we have a maximum amount of wattage that's associated with this and some exterior lighting zones. So this is something that hopefully everybody's been used to or seen a little bit of. But basically what we're doing is we are taking certain zones associated with certain areas. From there, we get a total wattage allowance. From there, we're going to add up some areas on a table to make sure that we're not exceeding the allowable number of watts. So it's very much a plug and chug sort of code section where we don't have like a full formula. There isn't like a huge depth to this calculation. It's just square footage and a certain amount of watts, and we got to stay within that. That's kind of the basic math behind this guy. And so the first thing we would want to look at is those exterior lighting zones, and those have pretty much stayed the same through each generation of the code here. And you can see there are four basic areas. We have developed areas that are clearly against national parks, forests, these areas that are sometimes associated with dark sky lighting and things like that. That can sometimes be one of those items that gets pulled into this discussion with councils or kind of that deeper sort of, how are we meeting our exterior energy use provisions? And there's a lot of advocates out there that want to see more limited exterior lighting generally, right? And oftentimes about budding national forest or things like that is a good impetus to have that discussion about why you treat these areas differently than others. Then we have predominantly residential zoning areas, neighborhood districts, light industrial. All other areas, so we get a catch-all here in number 3 that don't fit items 1, 2, or 4. And then item 3 here is high activity commercial, where we're going to have a lot of ambient light, a lot of exterior use light, a lot of lit signage, things like that. And so that's going to kind of play with a place where I think we have now some overlap with the energy code and typically what's handled through a planning and zoning component with photometric designs and making sure that we're kind of meeting that intent of, what that development is supposed to be from that neighborhood character sort of point of view. And then simultaneously, these other areas where we're really starting to get into the exterior efficiency for the overall site. And we're going to see that language come up in the 24 when you compare it to the 21 and just sort of that expansion, that clarification that they really are trying to make it clear that's for the entire site overall. So those exterior lighting zones, if you have to have this conversation with somebody, or maybe you need to delve into this for some, technical training, whether that be with your staff or whether it's for education for developers or some other folks, I found this resource through DOE. And I think it's a pretty good kind of explanation of this map that we have our zone 1 out here. This might be that area that's adjacent to rural or forested areas, places that are, generally not lit most of the time. We've got our typical zone 2, which is, residences, strip malls, those sorts of areas. We've got this zone 4 identified very much as city. And then 3 here, it is kind of funny because it's that catch-all definition. It's not very clear exactly what it would fit, except for anything that doesn't fit neatly into these categories. So for that, I think it's probably really pertinent if you're starting to have this conversation to just make sure that this discussion aligns with whatever you might have for zoning related requirements as well. So, okay, we figure out we're in zone 1 or 2 or 3. We figure out, okay, this is where this development's going to go. It aligns with our local regulations. It aligns with zoning and with their practices. And now we're going to see what happens with our power allowances. So this is out of the 21 code here, and we have our base power allowance. We also have a number of different square footage areas here where we're getting watts per square foot. So we're getting this as a multiplier against whatever that square foot area is. So that way we can tell, okay, we are within the area allowed for our wattage based on that exterior use and the specifics of how that area is being used. Now we do have 2 tables here. We have table 2, which basically goes over these walkway areas, canopies, dining areas, basically lists out all the stuff that I would say are typically directly associated with sort of the layout, the footprint of a particular development and where we're going to be putting stuff, right? We're going to be answering that question first. Then we also have this table 3, and this is for individual power allowances for specific uses. So for instance, here we have something identified for ATMs, and generically you just get this much allowed wattage for the additional ATM location, right? We have another one here for uncovered entrances and gates for inspection, right? So this kind of gets tied into that safety component that we need a little bit of lighting as somebody comes up. And so it's separately identified. And you notice that it crosses these zones, meaning that regardless of what zone you're in, this is that multiplier that you'd be using for this particular area to try and figure out what that is. So we have this area here. It's been not super static in the code, but it's been around for a little bit. A lot of folks are used to playing with this. So let's talk about what happened in the 2024 code. Well, like I said, we get some clarification language about this. The application of this particular code section is related not just to the building, but also to the site related to that building. So we get a little bit of clarifying here that we are looking at this a little bit holistically. And I've had some interesting questions come up where that's been maybe a little bit more difficult, where you have things like, say, shared parking lots adjacent to multiple structures and things like that, where you're responsible for some of this area, but not all of this area, and how are you going to deal with that? And as of right now, I'd say that because the code has kind of expanded into places where, not that long ago, basically anything for exterior lighting was like, hey, that's photometrics, that's planning, we don't regulate that. Now that we've expanded into this place where we are taking a deeper look at that, I really do think it's important to set the parameters of how you're going to evaluate that on that policy basis. If multiple folks are sharing a parking lot, if there's shared costs associated with that, if the developer is only doing certain sections of the builds, like the white shells or the corn shell for this sort of thing, and then the individual tenant spaces will have to do some exterior pertinences as well, for some modifications for entrances or things like that. That can obviously really color this conversation. So it's just important to kind of try and get a plan on how you want to go through this early, early in on the conversation. So what else changed in 24? Well, we get a rewrite of the table. So you can see that pretty much everything here is in blue. And I'm not going to make you read all of it, but you can certainly tell that there are some changes here, and I'm going to summarize them for you at the end. But basically, you go to this thing, this entire thing will be in blue if you look at it in your 24 code. This is that table number 3, that subtable here, and you can see here that we actually have these broken up. ATMs still cross every single one of these. Now it's 90 watts, so we've had a little bit of a decrease there. But the rest of these are actually broken up by zone areas as well. So we can see that there have been some changes in kind of the application of how this code is going to work overall. So for some summary for that, if you're looking to try and kick around, hey, which of these do you want to work with, or what are the high level differences? The base power allowances do change. They decrease a bit between the 21 and the 24. It's roughly half, and I say that with an asterisk next to it. Some are a little higher, some are a little lower. You need to take a look at which zones you're talking about, but it's kind of close to looking at about half. You'll also notice that it's about half on most of the power allowances per square foot as well. Some are a little different than that, but you will see them to be significantly more stringent in the 24 than they were in the 21. One of the things that is worth highlighting here is that the 24 expressly exempts staircases for these power allowance requirements. And I'm just going to jump back a couple of slides so everybody can see that here. So that is this right here, this item right here, stairways. And you'll notice in each of these, it is expressly exempted here. And so I think that that was part of the conversation that had been kind of unfolding with the energy code for some time, where some of these requirements for exterior lighting or exterior power allowances were touching areas related to what building officials would identify very clearly as public safety, or means of egress illumination, those sorts of things. And so there are definitely some components there that you want to take a look at here. Generally reduces the wattage per square foot in all of the table here, if you're looking at that 21 to 24 comparison. And then rewrites that table number 3 there, the smaller table, to make the item subject to the lighting zoning requirements rather than how we saw it the first time in the 21. So that's kind of the high level changes there. Just to make you aware as you kind of kick that around and take a look at what's contained. Now, earlier, if you remember that slide about 5 or 6 back, where we first start talking about exterior lighting, we talk about the exceptions. I note that there are 14 of them. So I've got them listed here from the 21 version because only a couple of minor modifications happened, and I summarized them for the 24 at the end here. So you get a few different considerations. This first one here is lighting approved because of safety considerations, right? That's your first exception. I included the definition of approved as acceptable to the code official. This is again a place, there's a few places now where, the energy codes regulations when it comes specifically to power distribution and potentially limiting that down, you get some outs due to things that are associated with safety, associated with security. But the code is relatively silent on how to interpret that or how to best kind of apply that section of the code. So as you look to that, I strongly recommend, again, spend the time to maybe draft policy about that, make that very clear between inspections, plan review, kind of all parts that might be touching this particular part of the code, that we all have to be of one mind about what is determined to be of safety consideration and how you are applying that. So that way somebody isn't saying all of their site lighting is functionally safety because, somebody could get robbed in a parking lot or something like that and they're expressing that concern. That's totally fair, but is that the intent of this regulation, right? And so it's really important to have that primed, have that conversation early so you're ready to, have that give and take in that conversation of what your intention is and how you're applying that while trying to be equitable to everybody's needs. So just strongly recommend, because that reuses that definition of approved there, that defined term, just to bring it back that this really is a place to set some policy to. Otherwise, emergency lighting, that's automatically off. We don't have to worry about that. Exit signs are also exempted from this wattage. Signal directors, advertising signs, that was obviously of some concern to some folks, depending on what district you're in, or back to that zone district conversation, but definitely don't want something that doesn't work well with local zoning ordinances or regulations that would allow somebody an illuminated sign and then have this related issue as well. Theatrical performances, instrumentation, you have a number of other exemptions here, and I'll just kind of keep going through here. Athletic playing areas. Again, this is one that typically, your zoning components really do identify hard on, floodlights for soccer fields and things like that, and the times that they're allowed to be used and so on and so forth. So it's just important to note that if you're having somebody that's coming in with those questions, hey, this exempts you on this side, it doesn't mean that you don't have regulations on the other side of the fence from us. Or maybe you are both the planning and the building, related supervisor, or, maybe you can have that conversation on both sides, but it's just about making sure that people aren't misinterpreting that information. Temporary lighting, industrial production, theme park elements as well. Art, public monuments, and the national flag. So these can be exempted as well. Water features and swimming pools. Obviously, with swimming pools, we have certain lighting requirements around the pool itself, for safety, for walking hazards, tripping hazards, that kind of thing, and for making sure that emergency services obviously can see and service those areas as well. So seeing those divorced from each other makes a lot of sense here. And then dwelling units as well. And so I know we have another one of these specifically on multifamily, and we'll really get into both sides of multifamily on like the residential side and sort of the aspects of that when it comes to energy use, and then also on the commercial multifamily side as well. So we'll really dig into that kind of next time around. So what happened in the 24 code for this section? Well, we alter items 7 and 14, and so I have them highlighted for you in blue here, where item 7 goes from just kind of theatrical, any sort of use for that, but now it's a little bit more specific to video, broadcasting equipment, or live or theatrical music performances. So we get a little bit more refined scoping in item number 7. In item number 14, we also get some clarification that it's a light controlled from within sleeping units and dwelling units. So that can be things like a porch light, for instance, right? If we're talking about a ground level apartment or things like that, where that might be directly adjacent to somebody's bedroom or something like that. So we've got a couple of places here that are hopefully answering some of those questions about the practicality of enforcement when it comes to this particular item and how easy that is to do. We also add item 15, and item 15 here refers to exterior means of egress illumination as required in the IBC. You jump over to chapter 10 of your IBC if you want to cross-reference that together and start to see exactly how that would spell out for you. But there are requirements to make sure that you have lighting that's going to allow you to get from that exit discharge point to a public way. And if there needs to be additional lighting in order to facilitate that process, that's a bit of what that's pointing to there. So as a reminder for you, as you're looking at trying to enforce this, there are great tools out there. You have your ComCheck software, which has its exterior lighting compliance certificate opportunity to use. So that's a great resource to utilize and sort of get this information consolidated, get this reviewed a little bit more easily in terms of the overall energy use for these areas based on watts, based on fixtures here, and we have our square footage. So it's running that exact same calculation we were talking about earlier for you. Obviously, this is just for parking area, but you have multiple breakdowns, once again, based on those wattage allowances and those particular areas for square footage. Now, exterior lighting controls, right? So, okay, we figured out what lights we can put in what areas. We are compliant with our zones. We're compliant with the amount of wattage that we're allowed. Now, what other requirements do we have? Well, we have a daylight shutoff, right? So that can be photometric. That can be based on timing. We have decorative lighting shut off as well. And you can see that there is sort of a operations related issue here. So you might come with a plan that has a sequence of operations discussion about when those are going to turn off, that they might be using an astronomical clock in order to be able to say, this is, daylight hours, and from there we're going to be turning off at these times. So that might be part of what you're looking at for that. Additionally, for lighting setback here, you have a reduction from midnight to 6 a.m. So you have this requirement for that 30% reduction. So what would this look like on a set of plans, right? Well, we might have multiple here. We might have an exterior light, say, on a timer over here. Here we have a timer. Here we have a timer identified on our plans as well. And those controls might look a little something like this, right? So for our time switches here, we have some minimums associated with that exterior control requirement. So that's got that minimum 7-day clock. You have to be able to set some different times. They must incorporate some automatic shutoff features here for things like holidays. Also able to program for backup loss for that 10 hours interrupted. So that's really the key focus there is for these controls to make sure that you have something that is going to fit the bill for what your needs are. And once again, we should have a sequence of operations on our plans that helps facilitate that conversation. So again, we might have something that looks like this. We have relay switch here, exterior building mounted using an astronomical clock, 30 minutes prior to sunset, 30 minutes after sunrise for its sequence. So these might be some of the ways that you might see that presented for you. So let's talk about parking garage lighting controls. This is one of those places that's not quite outside, but it's not quite inside either, and it's been part of the focus of some of the more recent interactions with the Energy Code when it comes to kind of expanding its scope for lighting controls, and definitely a place that I think a lot of code officials have been scrutinizing pretty closely because of its relationship to life safety, the fact that we're trying to get firefighters in or out of that building in case there's a car fire or a battery-related fire, right? So there's a lot of components that really float around in these occupancy spaces. So what I have highlighted for you here in blue is these are your changes between the 24 and the 21. And as you can see, it ain't much. So that's why I consolidated it down to one slide for you. So really the only changes you have is it's been relocated. There's been a pretty substantial reorganization between the 24 and the 21. So you'll see a lot of these just placed in a different location. And we get a clarification here that this is interior parking area rather than parking garage area. So we're being a little bit more specific about that, but otherwise it's a lot of the same stuff that we've been seeing for a good long time, which is summarized right over here. So we'd need to be on an occupancy sensor or a time switch. We'd reduce to 30% of lighting, a minimum of 30% reduction on your lighting, excuse me, 20 minutes after no occupancy or after no movement, right? If it's picking up that, occupancy use. We have zoning control related issues at 3,600 square feet. And then we've got a couple of other things here. We've got entrances and exits have a separate control narrative here where they're allowed to reduce to 50, right? So that allows for better eye adaptation when you're leaving the parking garage, heading out into the street. You don't want to be blinding somebody, nor do you want them to be in the dark and then going out directly into a street light where it's also, again, hard to see against traffic. So they're kind of trying to recognize the impacts of some of these areas and, what it is like to actually have to use this space and sort of the requirements associated with it. We also take into account the wall ratios for the larger openings being a soft story here to figure out where we're going to be putting these reductions for the amount of lighting that we're allowed to have. Because we know that we should be getting either ambient light from the outside, we should be getting sunlight during the day and things like that. And then deeper into the garage space where there is no daylight, that will be the places where you'll have sort of, that different expectation for running artificial lighting. So now on to fuel gas lighting. I threw this into a slide a little while ago, and it still makes me laugh every time I see it. I still enjoy watching Spider-Man point at other Spider-Man here, because the trickiest part about this is just asking who's going to be inspecting for this, right? So out of the code right now, the 21 and the 24 really read the same in this place. So 40553, and it's letting you know that they should not have gas-fired appliances, lighting appliances specifically, shouldn't have continuously burning pilot lights. Now, this is one of those places that, again, I wanted to bring up for everybody because a lot of communities have been trying to figure out, hey, in our movement towards maybe limiting down some of the fuel-fired appliances that we're allowing or trying to focus on electrification, things like that, this has been a place where some folks have wanted to highlight. It does make some sense. You don't see a whole lot of this. I'm familiar with some places in the country that have historic district related requirements that often require fuel gas lighting in order to keep the historical kind of contextual characteristic of that particular neighborhood where they've always had gas lamp lighting or that kind of thing. The other places, though, because this is, decorative lighting appliances, this could also be for religious institutions, right? If you have, say, for instance, a menorah or something like that, that is, like a large outdoor fire piece or something like that. You could see the instances, wedding venues as well, right, where you may want to make sure that you're being very clear about what you're allowing or not allowing and not creating circumstances where people may want to still have some of those amenities, but instead of doing it based on a, gas line that might be a little bit safer, a little bit more permanent for the building, they'll be doing it with temporary equipment like a propane tank and things like that, and making sure that they're, working with their fire district on those questions. But this is just one of those places where if it has ceremonial significance, religious significance, cultural significance, that's, I think, part of why fuel gas lighting still has kind of existed in any capacity, because it's clearly not something most people want to read by or, use on a regular basis. But, it's been there. It's been in the fabric of the community for a long time, or it's part of a greater cultural aspiration. So just recognizing that that's been part of the conversation, and it's important to have a clear expectation of who's going to be responsible for making sure if you are allowing gas lighting, who is going to inspect for this? Is your plumbing inspector going to be looking for this? Are they aware of that? Would it be a building inspector focused on energy code related items here? And at what point are you going to want to trigger this? Would this be during a final plumbing or before, after a rough plumbing? When would this occur in your process? So just for some clarification. So now we're on to pools and spas. So pools and spas have some basic requirements. So again, I'm kind of trying to highlight the big stuff that are part of these kind of community level conversations about things like heaters, time switches, cupboards, and what standards would apply to these sorts of things. And the standards one is really just kind of more edification than anything else. But we'll start with heaters at C404.8.1. You're required to have an on-off switch. You can also have a on and off switch that isn't directly located on the appliance, but in the immediate vicinity within that 3 feet area with ready access as a defined term in the code now, right? Ready access does have some specific components to it since the 21, where we know what that is supposed to exactly mean. You can't count the breaker as an on or off switch, even if it's within that 3 feet and everything else. This still has to be a separate control. And again, we have that gas-fired related issue about not having continuously burning pilot lights. For time switches, again, we're tying back to our pool heaters, our pool monitors. These can be built into the appliance, and that would be considered appropriate. Or this can be an added control that's somewhere in stream, so to speak, of the control process here. You have two exceptions that you're allowed to not have to worry about this for, which are 24-hour pump operation related pools, and then pools operating solar and waste recovery heat systems. Now, as we get to pool covers, on the right, I've given you the 21 code language. On the left is the 24 code language, and they're pretty close to the same here. We just have an addition of a sentence on the 24. So you can see here that basically, hey, you're supposed to provide some sort of a vapor retardant cover. There is a allowance for you to not have to do that, where you have 70% of the energy for the heating computed over an operating season, not less than 3 calendar months, is from a heat pump or on-site renewable energy system. Now, the 24 goes on to clarify that language a little bit with the expectation here, which is that, hey, your on-site renewables can't be the ones you counted for your additional efficiency package or for required renewables. This has to be in addition to. Basically, this is kind of tying back to that conversation about the REMP sort of conversation of if you need to offset your energy use, right? Offset what you're going to be doing with some of these exterior appliances through renewables. The code is kind of already pulling in this direction by saying, hey, if you want to use this exception, then you would have to meet this independently of any of the other renewables that you're worried about providing. And then, like I said, just more for edification than anything else, there's a reference to APSP 14 here, which is the Portable Electric Spa Energy Efficiency document. There is actually a pretty good write-up floating around with Justin Wiley and Nick Coelho about this particular document and kind of what's contained in it. So if you're looking for a read on trying to get to understand this a little bit better, that's floating around. If you'd like to email me at the end, I'd be sure to, send you that reference if you want to do a little bit more deep dive reading on the topic. So that's high level pools and spas and what's been different between the 21 and the 24 for this conversation. And now I'm taking us more into those semi-heated spaces, those large opening spaces. So this is going to be things like our vestibules, our restaurant areas with large roll-up doors or large openings, loading docks, outside heating. That's going to be kind of the focus for this next chapter of the class here. And so we know right out of the gate, and this is not directly tied to our exterior energy efficiency, but it is something to just kind of clearly see that it's informing the rest of the conversation on this topic, which is that we're requiring more and more zoning controls for temperatures. And we can see that identified in a number of different places, starting with vestibules. So heated or cooled vestibules have a reference for 403, 414, which basically says you have to have a separate thermostat to limit the amount of heating or cooling in the vestibule. Now, my understanding of this conversation is that like this was not necessarily in the intent here was not requiring cooling of a vestibule. The idea was that people were dropping sprinkler heads into vestibules and then concerned about the freeze-thaw effects of those areas. And because they were tied back to a thermostat, maybe for this area that was way further back in the building, that meant that this particular area could get very, very cold. Then we'd be subject to freeze, thaw, and lose that sprinkler head or, cause multiple issues with it. Maybe it doesn't respond when you need it to, all of that good stuff, right? So that was the intention. And then it kind of got crowbarred in to also allow the cooling element as well. Wasn't really the intention to be tied to with it, but now regardless, when you cool or when you heat, you have certain limitations of what you're allowed to do in terms of your set points for those areas, and you do need to have it independently controlled. So our exceptions for these areas here, we've got 1 through 7 here. We allow things like an air curtain to be an exemption. Obviously, we don't have climate zone 0 through 2 in Colorado, so that's kind of a wash over there. But we do have things like revolving doors as a potential option, and also the area limitation at 3,000 square feet. So you do want to take a look at this for the application as far as what this area is going to be interacting with. So here's an example of our cabinet unit heater, right? So this is one that somebody's tossed into this particular area. And what's that going to look like? Well, on our plans here, we have it identified. Great. We have a cabinet unit heater. We've got a little bit of information here for what its make and model is. We see that its service area is the vestibule over here, and we're getting information regarding its related controls. So now we get a sequence of operation, right? So now we're being told, okay, and we're going to make sure that we're heating or cooling based on certain parameters. Heat 60 degrees, cool to 85 degrees right here. So we get some clarification. This is one of my favorites just for a good laugh for everybody. This is the best air curtain in a Mexican restaurant that I have ever seen. And you have to admit, it's trying to do the job. It's certainly trying to meet the intent there. It worked. When you open the door, the fan would kick on. When you close the door, the fan would turn off. I don't know that it meets necessarily in the testing standards associated for air curtains, and it would go through that process. I'm guessing no. But, it's just a testament to, first of all, people's ingenuity, and we've been at it for 40 minutes. I want to make sure everybody at least gets one good laugh out of the class today, gets to enjoy something here. So it's just fun. It's just a fun idea of trying to tackle this problem, and it seemed to work at the time. You got to give them credit for that. So now we'll jump over to operable openings here. That's C402.5.11. So this is in the 21 IECC. There are some changes to this, and I'll identify them in the 24, but it's pretty close to a similar application here. And what we're looking at is, okay, we've got these areas now in a lot of restaurants, especially in areas post-COVID, where maybe they added that outdoor seating arrangement, right? Expanded into a patio area that they didn't have before. And then they wanted some communicability with it. They wanted large window openings. They wanted roll-up garage doors, right? Things like that. A lot of breweries in Denver have this sort of thing. A lot of spaces that have been repurposed from maybe their original commercial use have kept, parts of their building like that with large openings, and want to use them during the summer to take advantage of some of that area. And it's totally viable to do, but we do require a couple of things here when it comes to zoning the mechanical system, because we don't want that kicking on at times where we don't need that operating and running appropriately. So that's really the intention behind this, is saying, okay, when those doors open, they need to be able to interlock with the mechanical system to tell it, okay, we're changing our set points and we're not going to run the AC. We're not going to keep it 70 degrees in here. We're not going to try to. We're going to allow the temperature to fluctuate a little bit more. Now, we do get some exceptions to that as well. So we have our 40 square feet, and at that point, we get our new set points here, and these need to change within 10 minutes of opening with interlocked controls. But we do get exemptions. So our exceptions come from zoned food prep areas. We don't want our wonderful cooks in the back of the kitchen burning to death back there because it's 95 degrees outside and it's 150 degrees in front of that oven while they're trying to make pizza. We don't want them in that position where they aren't getting the AC necessary to keep their workspace comfortable. We also have warehouses and first entry doors. So this is what's identified in the 21. And we can talk about what changed in the 24. So first of all, like I said, you had a lot of reorganization with the 24. Stuff moved around. This moved to 403.4.7 for your reference there. We get kind of a reorganization of the way that this is written, still with a lot of the same content. So we still see that 55 and 90 for our heat set points, heating and cooling set points, excuse me. We also see that 40 square feet for our interlock. This now changes to 5 minutes of opening rather than 10. So when you go to the section, it will be blue. It'll all be rewritten because it functionally was. But really, the biggest difference that you take a look at here is that 5 minutes rather than 10 minutes of opening. Additionally, we get more clearly enumerated exceptions associated with this issue. about where you're allowed to use this, where you don't have to worry about it. So for instance, emergency exits, right, where the automatic alarm is going to sound, those are exempted from your 40 square feet here, right? Building entrances with automatically closing devices. So this is really trying to parse out the fact that these are for those intentionally operating large overhead doors and things like that that kind of change the makeup of a restaurant or a space or a warehouse. That would be your large roll-up doors for your warehouse, things like that. So we have a number of different items here. We also have air curtains identified again. So that being said, we also treat that separately from heating outside of a building. So again, we get back to our controls. This is updated for reference here, 403.14.1. So just a minor change there in the location, but otherwise the content is roughly the same between the two codes. On loading dock weather seals, we have again a change in location here, 402.6.7. So we have an update there about the location. And then we get a clarification here about the language that the weather seal is meant to restrict air leakage. Last time they used another word. I think it was like inflow of air or something like that. It was a little bit different. But air leakage obviously speaks to the nature of some of the other stuff in the energy code when we're talking about air leakage testing and all of that. It's just more of a consistent term. So that was really kind of the only content change there. But I mean, this is functionally the difference we're talking about on this building, right? We can see here that we have a loading dock area, and I know it's kind of in shadow there. It's kind of tough to see. But effectively, we have a roll-up door right here with no aero seal around this at all, no seal whatsoever. Meanwhile, over here, we can see that this one is, form-fitting to the tractor trailer that's been brought over to it to help keep the warehouse area cooler and affect that more efficiently. And now we're jumping on to snow melt and gutter de-icing systems. So the only difference here for you between the 21 and the 24 when we talk about snow melt systems is location. Moved from 403.13.1 to 403.14.2. So a minor change in location there. But otherwise, set points are the same and control requirements are the same as that's been. Again, this really speaks to some of those areas that I think the mountains have been working with for a very long time here, where they've had multifamily projects and developments that have used, whole development snow melt systems. And so they're maybe more used to that than some of the Denver metro area here. But I know that that conversation has come up quite a bit in the metro area for some more developers that are, looking at these systems, looking at leveraging some of these systems. And I know that discussion has kind of been on topic lately. Another one here that I want to pull up for you is roof de-icing. Now, roof de-icing was actually added. It was a local homegrown code change. This one came from the Colorado chapter of the ICC, and specifically somebody from, I believe it was a plans examiner named Nick from the city of Aspen. And so basically what they identified is, hey, people are running their heat tape systems, things like that, year round. They're even kind of noticing that their energy bills are high midsummer, and then because they don't have any controls on those heat tape systems, they are finding out that they've been running them for the entire summer, and that hey, we shouldn't have been doing that. So code change got in and was approved that identifies that hey, we're going to use moisture sensors to shut down the system in the absence of moisture, or a daylight sensor that basically says hey, the sun's shining, we don't need to be running this. Which makes a whole lot of sense here. So we've got this temperature limitation at 40 degrees here. I know that there are some neighborhoods here in Colorado that have had those for a good long time. I used to work in a couple of them where I know folks used to ask all the time about what are the codes for my gutter de-icing system, and there really obviously there weren't any. You make kind of best recommendations of like, hey, these are good things you can do, but that was about it. Now you do have this requirement if people are putting those sorts of heat tape systems in, and you're looking at adopting the 24 code overall. So in a nutshell, those are the big changes kind of associated with this space in the energy code and exterior energy use and that sort of conversation. You'll notice a lot of the conversation today went back over and over again to this concept of setting some policies on some of these things because they're brand new for some of these items like de-icing controls, stuff like that. It's really imperative to make sure that you're having that conversation with staff about if you're adopting this, what's that going to look like for those safety concerns, safety in area or what lighting is considered for safety and things like that. So I want to make sure that I really emphasize sort of a slide that you guys have all seen quite a bit, which is inspect what you expect, noting these conversations early on in the conversation about the impact of things like somebody saying something's for safety lighting or things like that can really make that difference. It can also maybe dial down if you're looking at making the jump to this code, and you have, you want to make sure that your city council is aware of what some of the changes are going to look like. Nobody wants that phone call going upstairs that says, "Hey, your building department won't let me turn on any outside lights, and I'm scared." And then you have to explain like, well, we do have, new requirements that regulate that. And that's certainly not the intention is to say somebody can't use outdoor lighting, but it is that we're trying to limit down some of those things. So it's just about making sure that everybody on a community lift with any sort of new code conversation is kind of up to speed with those expectations. So I hope that that's helpful for you. I hope that that's information that you can find really usable. I know we have a few minutes left. I wanted to make sure that I left enough time to mention a few of our upcoming training offerings to you guys. May 13th here, we have a installation with the experts class. We've got two individuals, Jay Crandall and Jason Van Dever, who are experts in continuous and cavity insulation. And we have them for 2 hours, we're lucky to say, to help answer any of your questions with mixed systems, talk about best practices for installation, and strongly recommend that you register for this and get set up. I think it would be a really good use of your time and a really good opportunity to be able to engage with some folks. We're also doing this training with a couple of other states that we have this similar program in. So you'll be able to be talking with code officials from a number of different places, from New Mexico, from Texas. Yeah, Guadalupe, it is Jason. Yep, yep, Vandiver. I may have spelled his name wrong in that. I thought it was Vandever, Vandever without a space, but you might be right, and I will double check if I have it wrong anywhere else, because I would feel like a real jerk if I spelled his name wrong. So thank you for that. But I will definitely double check that, Guadalupe. So hope you guys can attend that. I feel like it's going to be a really good opportunity to dig in on some really good training. We also are kicking off with a residential compliance deep dive series. So this will be a hard look at each of the compliance paths out of the 24 code and comparing them to the 21 to help inform you guys about what's changed, what's different. So we've got them broken down here, prescriptive compliance, total building performance, energy rating index. Each will be 1 hour, going through all the different parts of how do you comply, how have things changed for your submittals, what your expectations should be. And like I said, comparing the 21 and the 24 code here. So if you'd like to register for that, this is going to be the schedule. So 422, 429, and 56. Those are from 8 to 9 a.m. MST. You'll find that over here on the link as well. Oh, correct on the spelling. Okay, thank you. I do appreciate that. Um, And yeah, so registration link is located here if you'd like to jump in. We'd love to see you guys there. Last we heard those early morning slots, people seem to find that that really worked well for them. So we're hoping to keep that up for you with that 8 to 9. We also have a commercial compliance path series I'll be advertising a little bit later on, and that starts after 5:13. So I believe it's 5:20 that morning, May 20th, and then each week after that for the same sort of pattern, a 3-week process to go through each of those different compliance methods. And last but not least, we always have the codes helpline for you here, so please take advantage of that. Send us your questions. We're always happy to help, dive in. And yeah, it's kind of fun to think about, but these codes will all be getting updated to the 24s in the near future as well here too. So I'll have to redo the slide, but that's honestly exciting. So we'll have another whole round of codes to go through, and if you have questions for that, please feel free to use that resource. We've got a lot of good expertise that serves the Colorado Energy Office and the Excel helpline there. And really grateful to be able to afford that tool for you. Oh, absolutely. Leonard, which QR code? Because I've shown three. Do you remember which one you were trying to get to? Because I will absolutely pull down the link for you if it's not loading up. So feel free to toss all of them, please. Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. Leonard, I will pull your email out from the end and yeah, make sure to send you all three as direct links for you. Hopefully make it a little easier. And so with that, please take a few minutes to fill out your survey. It really is important to us. It's super useful for us to be able to get that. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry, guys. We had a problem with that the other day. So yeah, tell you what, everyone who tosses their name in the chat saying they'd like a link, you can expect an email from me right after this. I'll go ahead and pull those. I know we had a problem with it on a email blast as well, and it could be that that same link is just a dead old one. I'll have to get that fixed. Thank you, Heather. Absolutely. So yeah, please fill out your surveys. It really does mean a lot to the program. It helps us keep this thing going and helps report back to all the folks interested here. You got it, Jose, Carlos, absolutely. I'll make sure to forward those over for you. I've actually got a prefab email ready to go. So with that, I'll hang out for any other questions you guys have from the topics today. Anything else you want to follow up with? Otherwise, my contact information is right here and you guys can enjoy the rest of your day and have a few minutes back from our normal 1 hour class here. Thank you all. Really appreciate you. You got it, Tim. Absolutely.